Peace and greetings, you guys. What's good? It's your girl Naya here from the Metaphysical Mommy, and this video is going to be about significator cards. Actually, I'm going to do a few videos on significator cards in general. So one thing that was happening over on the Facebook group Fortune's Wheelhouse Academy, basically what we did was we took our birth chart and broke down our cards, broke down our chart in the form of cards. So what a lot of people are asking is, okay, now, what do I do with these cards? What does it mean? What do I do with it? So I think one of the main things that I can say, if you're somebody who is very familiar with tarot, but not necessarily particularly adept at astrology, is to keep in mind that tarot is the microcosm, while astrology is the macrocosm, and we here on the earthly plane are the channels. We're the intermediaries, where what happens in the cosmos reflects and corresponds to what happens on earth, and what happens to us kind of tends to reflect what happens in tarot, specifically because of the way that it's structured and whatnot. So think about it in that way. So when you look at a chart, I don't have an actual printed chart near me right now, but if you're looking at your birth chart and you're looking at it and you're like, what the hell does this mean? You have to remember that astrology is a separate discipline from tarot, just like many other type of divination systems. You can choose to integrate them or overlap them, as there are certain similarities. Okay. Now, when you're looking at a birth chart, and an astrologer is looking at a birth chart, they're reading the chart. They're looking at these symbols, like the symbols here that we have, like at the bottom of the thoth, we have like Taurus, and, everything that Taurus can stand for: stubborn, persistent, maybe slow moving, all these associated words come through when an astrologer looks at the signs on the astrology chart. It's the same thing for tarot readers separately. When they look at the cards, they're looking at not just the title, they're looking at the pictures. They're looking at, well, what does this bull's head mean in this picture? What does this lamb mean in this picture? What does this light mean in this picture? And there's esoteric and metaphysical meanings. And the thing is one thing to remember about all of this in general is that symbols are universal. Okay, so what might bring a good feeling to one person may not bring a good feeling to another person. So we're all going to read different just solely based on that. However, there are certain principles that are kind of in place that kind of keep it more or less streamlined. So sorry about ranting so much, but I'm just trying to give it to you, like, if you know what I mean, like you're completely clueless on astrology, that it's not too much different. It's I think if you're coming from tarot and you're wanting to get into astrology, learning the fundamentals is probably going to be your best bet. Meaning, learn what your signs mean, learn the symbol of the sign and what's associated with that sign, the positive aspect and the negative aspect. Same way you would with tarot. You know what I mean? Like what's a good representation of the Hierophant? What's a negative interpretation of the Hierophant, right? What's that middle ground? All of that kind of overarches in astrology. So learn your fundamentals, learn your planets, learn your signs, learn your houses, and learn your aspects. In keeping in line and in tandem with tarot, I would suggest to stick with, and this is according to my reality and what I've learned, is to stick with Western astrology and with the classical planets or traditional astrology, basically where they use all the planets up to Saturn. Forget about the asteroids, forget about the modern planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto for now. If you're just starting off, trust me, it is more than enough information to really sink your teeth into. Plus those other planets are more generational, a little bit more transpersonal. So if you're really focused more on your self-development and focusing on yourself, I think that traditional astrology with the classical planets is a really good place to start with. And it falls very nicely with the tarot structure as well. Now, here's the thing. Here's kind of the kicker, right? The kicker is that if you're familiar with tarot, you're already partially familiar with the energies of astrology. Okay, so let's take the Emperor, for example. The Emperor corresponds to Aries. Now, all I want you to do is I want you to just take a second. Okay, can I bring this in? This is probably not the best. Hold on, I'm going to flip this around. All right, so I want you to look at this Aries card. This is from the Thoth tarot, Thoth, however you say it. Tarot, this is the Emperor. Okay, I'm going to move these guys out the way just for focus sake. I want you to just take a second, and I want you to throw out or get a pen and paper out, write down some keywords you automatically associate with the Emperor. Go ahead and pause this while you do that. Take 2 minutes, 5 minutes. Don't take too long on it. Just do it. Okay. Now we're back, right? Okay. So what did you do? You probably did things like structure, form, discipline, fire, as far as the element is concerned, especially based on the color of the card, right? You think maybe he's ready for war. You think just based on the imagery. Well, when you talk about Aries, you're talking now when you're talking about the signs themselves, you're talking and you're discussing, you are discussing like verbs. You're discussing action, a way something presents itself. So Aries is martial energy. It is about war and structure and form. It is about the will, the rule over the kingdoms. All right. It's about taking that which is wild and trying to, for lack of a better term, beat it into submission to keep it from getting out of hand, right? So there's this idea with the Emperor himself that, you know, that it's his way or the highway, and that he's probably very headstrong. Now, all of those things that I just said, you as a tarot reader are really aware of, right? Those also describe Aries traits, which when you ever hear an astrologer say there's a 1-to-1 ratio for, like, you know, like let's say Mars rules Aries, the planet Mars rules Aries. The planets kind of are like the function, while the signs are the action. So how do I break that down? So yeah, so you look at this figure in this card and you think, what is he capable of doing? Right? All those words that you could come up with that is something that he would do, that he would naturally do, is going to be something very Aries and something very martial or Mars. Now, without getting too much onto the other side of like the astrology side, if you just keep that in mind and then you decide to kind of dip your toes into the astrology section a little bit more, it'll become a little bit more apparent when you're actually reading a chart, because in the chart you almost break it down by like noun, verb, and then So that's basically it. The planet is the noun. Okay. The martial energy, this kind of assertive, forceful, forward energy. And then we've even talked about, I'm sure if you have dealt with like things like the court cards, you hear things like cardinal energy, cardinal fire energy. That's what you're getting with Aries, because Aries is a cardinal fire sign. So those qualities of being cardinal and fire coincide with Mars, the planet Mars, and Aries. So Mars as a planet itself is about how you assert yourself. It's about how the way that you come across when you need to be aggressive. You know, and it's not like being aggressive is always a bad thing, right? Sometimes we need that to get our point across, to make things happen, to will things to happen and whatnot. So that's like, that's like the function of assertion, the function of will, the function of, the warrior archetype, if you will. But almost like, if you think about like the movie 300, like Leonidas, like he was the king of war, right? The king of Sparta. This is what the emperor is essentially is. Like he can fight if he needs to. He can hold off if he needs to. He can come up with a battle plan if he needs to get things done, because it's not just going to war for war's sake, but sometimes it is to protect, right? Sometimes it is to keep things in balance, keep things from getting too wild, even though the war itself can sometimes be wild. So there's that function there. Okay. So I think the easiest, I kind of went on a tangent and I wasn't really trying to. I'm trying to keep it as concise as possible, but I think one of the main differences is that when you're looking at an astrology chart, it is much more cerebral, much more astral, much more in the mental realm, a little bit more abstract, where if you're good with words, if you like linguistics, if you like ideas, and you can kind of, free associate, but kind of know what your realm is of descriptors and whatnot, that astrology might be kind of fun for you, because you get to look at something and you're like, oh, I see this, it's like you're calculating, right? But with tarot, it almost gives you the image. It almost helps you to solidify the image if you've ever had a hard time just in that mental realm, just in your head, trying to put together like, well, what does this mean? What does Mars mean? What does Aries mean? And in the Northern Hemisphere, I think it's a little bit easier for us. It's not really technically the best way to learn it, but being that the Western astrological tradition did start in the Northern Hemisphere, it makes sense a little bit, where Aries being cardinal, it brings in all cardinal signs bring in a new season. So in the Northern Hemisphere, Aries brings in the spring. And what is the spring? The will to grow, the will to live, the will to survive. Then we have that whole saying with Aries, the I am, and ruled by the head. So who's the head of Sparta? It's King Leonidas, like that. You know what I mean? He is I am Sparta. That whole, I think that movie is a good kind of idea and representation of martial energy, because that whole the whole Spartan community was very war centric. What they did night and day was prepare for war. It's not that they were constantly at war, but they prepared for it. They were fighters. The will to live and survive, that's what they were fighting for, right? So we have that. We have that going on. But again, going back to the weather, the cardinal season, or I'm sorry, the spring equinox in the Northern Hemisphere brings in the spring. It's a little bit late this year for us though. And, that fire within the earth, you know, it comes out through the branches. So then you could think of the wands cards. A lot of those have like branches with little sprouts growing on it. It's the will to come out and be alive and fight for survival, fight to live. I think that's the most basic core aspect of this archetype, but it is that warrior archetype. It is that protector archetype as well. Let's see. So, okay. So that's a little tangent on how to look at the cards in relation to astrology. And I just started out with the Emperor because, for example, for me, in my birth chart, my moon is in Aries. Okay. So what does that mean? So the moon, so like I said, the planets are the function, right? So the moon is the function of the emotional realm. It is my emotional reality. It is when I'm in, the way that I feel inside that maybe nobody else sees, or unless you really, really know me, is this function of being a protector, being a fighter, to live, to keep things in order, to keep things structured, right? To keep things from getting out of hand. This is legitimately for me, like if I say I'm going to do something and I will say it and I will get stubborn as hell, and I will be so headstrong because I will not let anything get in my way of getting this goal done, getting this project done, getting this idea out there. I just get focused. But this is my emotional drive. Okay, this is what burns in my belly basically when it comes down to things I'm extremely passionate about. Mars is also about passion, and Aries is about passion, and so is the Emperor. I mean, hello, he's looking at the Empress. If you put in the cards in order, he's looking at the Empress. Hey, why is he he's staring at her hard. I don't think he's trying to hurt her, but he's very passionately looking at her because he's percolating inside, right? So there's that. So that's how I would apply this card to my natal chart. Looking at this, so this would be one of the significant cards in the tarot for me personally. This Emperor represents my emotional reality. My Mercury is also in Aries. So this is also how I talk. Sometimes, now, mind you, there's that function of Mercury. Mercury is about the intellect. It's about communication. It's about siblings, short-term travel. There's a lot of different functions with Mercury. I'm not going to get into it completely in this video, but I just want to basically mention that because I also have my Mercury in Aries, my Mercury is in a retrograde. So what does that mean? Retrograde, I like to similarly think of as far as correspondence to tarot goes, almost like a card in reverse. But when I read the card in reverse, I tend to think about things as being more internalized. So there's a lot of times where maybe I should speak on something and I don't, because I tend to want to analyze it. I tend to want to try to think it through. I think that has a lot more to do with my sun or my rising sign, essentially. Coming into play, but it doesn't mean I'm not thinking about it. It doesn't mean I'm not passionate about it. Now, but it's still the same energy. So sometimes maybe I might come across too crass. Maybe I might come across harsh to people. I've had people tell me in the past, like, man, you're kind of mean. And I'm like, was I mean? And I'll go back home and I'll think about it like, was I mean? I don't think I was mean. I think I said what I meant. But it's not always sugarcoated, and I think that's an aspect of Aries. It's an aspect of the Emperor to basically say things the way that they are. Just kind of bluntly say it. It comes out with that rush sometimes, that kind of like that push, and sometimes it might sound aggressive or it might come across as being aggressive or offensive or something of that sort. Now, this is a theme I've dealt with throughout my entire life, so it's not something that's unusual to me. However, sitting here contemplating and meditating on the cards that correlate with, my moon sign and my Mercury, these functions that are a part of my profile, right? A part of my personality makeup, maybe my persona, however you really want to, whatever approach you want to come to astrology or tarot with. I think that it being a tool for self-reflection, I think astrology is really good for that too. But seeing it personified, knowing that it's easy, it was so interesting for me because I came from astrology into tarot, and once I started reading stuff, it all like clicked for me rather quickly, and I was like, oh, okay, I get it. So everything that I know about Aries is the same thing that is being said about the Emperor. Of course, there's different cultural aspects to consider, but for the most part, those basic fundamental properties are available in both. So when you see these symbols on your cards, know that if you look at a chart, when you see that, you can think of the Emperor. When you see that, you can think of the Hierophant. And if you know a lot about Taurus in general, and then you think about the Hierophant, you start making little connections. Like, a lot of people struggle with the Hierophant card many times because it is a religious figurehead talking or standing on the pulpit and whatnot. There's something to be said about this kind of this channeled energy, this bringing this old tradition, this routine that's come down from generations, and trying to keep that going. That is a very Taurian trait. And it doesn't necessarily need to be in the religious aspect. It could be passing down family, family, I don't know, trinkets and stories and things like that. I'm not going to get too much into the Hierophant in this one. If you guys want me to keep going, let me know. I don't mind. I just don't want this video to get too long. So I'm going to go ahead and stop here. But I hope that kind of helps break down some of the information for you. And then I'll go ahead and stop this, go into another video and talk about the different functions for the different planets, so that you can try to, sit and contemplate and think about how these energies have been represented in your life, how they've played out, how they've manifested, how does it make you feel? Are there, it always helps to also be very truthful with yourself and looking in the positive and the negative aspects of each of these archetypes. When in your life have you been, or like when in my life have I been a very, Emperor in reverse, or ill-dignified? You know what I mean? Being put in situations of complete chaos and not having control over the situation made me a little crazy. Just a little bit cray-cray. You know what I mean? And it was a very stressful time for me during those times. But that was me being ill-dignified. That mercurial part of me, that emotional part of me just felt like it was spiraling. Okay? So that's not the duration of my life, but it has been different pockets within my life that I've been able to witness. Hindsight is always 20/20, but been able to look back and kind of go, oh, okay, I get it now. I see it now. I see how I could actually handle this situation better with these traits within, these traits that tend to manifest themselves and whatnot. So, okay. All right, I'm going to stop this one. I'll talk to you guys on the next one. Peace and blessings.